Bonjour à tous. Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here today. My name is Alessia Lefebvre. I'm the director of the Alliance program at Columbia University. We are here today to welcome a distinguished guest, Marie-Hélène Aubert, and her discussant, Emmanuel Guerin, who is at Columbia University. It is our first event of the semester, but it's also the first event that Columbia organizes under special circumstances. We, as you know, the city of Paris will host in 2015 what is called the COP21. You'll hear more about this, the conference on climate change. And because France has decided to host it, it's something very important. France has taken a special commitment. I think Marie-Hélène has a special role into this, as she's the advisor to the President of the Republic. And I think we can say that it's very much thanks to her that Paris has obtained this privilege. France intends to play a special role, both in making this conference a success in itself, that is to say that all the parties will be able to talk and discuss and reach an agreement, but also to convey a special position in order for this conference to not only be a success in itself, but also to push things forward. So Sciences Po, part of the Alliance program, Columbia University, but also École Polytechnique and Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, so the 4 universities that created a few years ago the Alliance program, decided that this was a special, really an opportunity to use together their resources and organize a series of public events and academic events from now to the conference in Paris in June 2015 to organize debate and take part into the preparation of this success, hopefully. So there will be, throughout this month, in Paris and in New York, a number of talks like this one, a number of student activities involving SIBA students here, the PhD program on sustainable development, but also other students, undergraduate, master students, both here and in Paris. There will be, I don't know if I have the right to announce it, Emmanuel, but there will be a simulation of the conference, the same that was organized a few years ago by Sciences Po to simulate the Copenhagen conference. So to see if, by playing it as if they were on stage, like students, they can play it, if we have another result, or if we can understand better some of the processes. Right. So this is to say that thanks to the permanent mission of France to the United Nations that first had the idea to bring Marie-Hélène Aubert here at Columbia University, so a special thanks to the Ambassador Gérard Haraud, but also to François Gave, Counselor on Sustainable Development Issues, Adrien Pinelli, in charge of climate in particular. So all this team that decided to bring the discussion here at Columbia University, particularly, and not to any other university. I hope you will be with us for all this series of events throughout all these months. So we're going to be together until 10:30 about. It's going to be probably a discussion. I will leave Emmanuel to introduce formally Marie-Hélène, also because they know each other. They work together. They had the opportunity. Let me say a few words about Emmanuel Guerin, who joined Columbia University very recently. He joined Columbia in October 2013. The Earth Institute, who is one of the sponsors today. And he decided to come here from Sciences Po, where he was working at IDRI, a think tank based at Sciences Po on sustainable development and international relations, to join Jeff Sachs and his team on the Sustainable Development Solution Network. He leads the work on energy and climate policies, and he, in particular, manages the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project, which is really a major, one of the major projects of SDSN. When he was at IDRI, some of you know the work of IDRI, he was particularly in charge of energy and climate. And before that, he used to be the advisor of the chair of the ad hoc working group on long-term cooperative action under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He was the advisor of Michael Zamit-Kutajar. So he has a very, very deep knowledge of these international negotiations under the United Nations on climate change and policy. So I'm very grateful that he accepted to be here as a discussant. I know that both Marie-Hélène and Emmanuel are very known for their franc-parler, and that they will be, I think it will be an interesting discussion. So they will first discuss, the two of them, and then, of course, they will open the floor to you. So I'm confident that you will have provoking questions for them. Thank you very much. Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Alessia, for your very kind introduction, and thank you very much to the Alliance Program for having organized this conference in partnership with the Earth Institute and the SDSN. Good morning. I hope you're warm inside and you're going to enjoy the conference. It's, of course, a great pleasure and an honor to welcome Marie-Hélène Aubert for this conference. As was said by Alessia, Marie-Hélène is the personal advisor to the French President François Hollande on environmental and climate change negotiations. And as Alessia said, she's been really the key person behind the decision to host the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in France in December 2015 and not in June, so that leaves us 6 more months to do the work, the hard work that needs to be done. Marie-Hélène has a long-time personal, I would say, commitment to climate change and more broadly to environment and social issues. She's expressed that personal commitment in different capacities prior to being the advisor to the president. She's been elected in a number of positions, both at the French Parliament, where at some point she was the rapporteur on the Kyoto Protocol, and more recently as a member of the European Parliament. So she really is the good person to discuss about the challenges posed by climate change and more specifically for that conference today about the plan of the French presidency of the COP21 of the UNFCCC in Paris in December 2015. So before I give the floor to Marie-Hélène for about 20 minutes of speech, let me give some very short word of introductions. Probably don't need to remind anybody about the magnitude of the threat posed by climate change, but it's always important to have the right numbers in mind when we discuss the challenges posed by climate change. So just a few numbers as a warm-up this morning. I mean, if we want to limit the temperature increase to less than 2 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels, as science and in particular the IPCC tells us we should do to avoid risks that would otherwise be completely unmanageable. That means that the CO2 emissions related to energy, so not all the greenhouse gases, but let me focus on energy since this is such a big part of the equation, in particular here in the US, but it means that these CO2 emissions, which are today above 30 gigaton of CO2, need to reach probably in between 10 to 15 gigaton by 2050. So they roughly speaking need to be divided by 2. And in the meantime, we expect, and for pretty good reasons, in particular to ensure the economic catching up of the developing countries and to fight poverty, we expect the world GDP, the world gross domestic product, to be multiplied by 3 by 2050. So if you add these two numbers up, it means that the challenge we're talking about this morning is really about dividing by a factor 6 the CO2 energy content of GDP in between today and 2050. So I guess everybody will agree that this is a pretty significant challenge, and I'm here only talking about mitigation, but I'm sure some would argue that, and I would be one of them, that adaptation is an equally important problem that need to be addressed, and that technology and finance as the enabling means of mitigation and adaptation also need to be addressed in these international negotiations. So that's the challenge. That gives you an idea that the task of the French presidency by December 2015 is not going to be an easy one, but of course it's not only the task of the French presidency, it's our collective duty to put the world on a truly decarbonized pathway. The context, both politically and economically, is not an easy context to reach a deal by 2015, that's for sure. But in the meantime, if you observe carefully what's going on, you can identify pretty positive signals at different levels. Some countries are really being serious about addressing greenhouse gases emissions, and in particular, I'm sure we will discuss that. The European Commission just put on the table a proposal to be considered by the heads of states in the coming weeks to reduce emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. But it is a fact that for a number of years, other countries beyond Europe and the OECD more broadly are taking serious steps to reduce their emissions, and China certainly is one of them, together with other emerging countries. But even if you look at other levels, and not only countries, you can identify positive signals. I mean, there are some businesses seriously engaged into low-carbon business models, and they're getting organized to do that. In particular, we've got a pretty well organized now association of renewable energies, not so much on energy efficiency, but it's my hope that it's going to be the case soon. And at other levels also, you have local authorities, and in particular cities, who are particularly ambitious on climate change, and they're more and more active in these international negotiations. So I see the role of the French presidency, but more broadly of these international negotiations, as encouraging these stakeholders, providing a framework for further action by them, and making sure that all of that adds up in the end and puts us, as I said, on a truly deep decarbonization pathway. So, of course, a global agreement is not going to solve everything and once and for all in Paris in December 2015, and it's going to be only as good as what countries can put in it. But in the meantime, it is a very important driving force of what is going to be happening in the years to come in the countries, from businesses and from local authorities. So that's the challenge in front of us. So let me stop here and give the floor to Marie-Hélène, as I said, for a roughly 20-minute speech. Then I'll abuse my role as the discussant and ask her a few questions, but very rapidly we will turn to the audience for a series of questions and answers. Thank you very much.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Emmanuel, for your kind introduction. So it is very nice for me to be here today. It's a great honor to be invited by Columbia University. It's not only a leading academic institution, but we all know that it's a long history of close partnership with France. So I really feel at home here. So I will continue in French. No, that's a joke. So today I'm going to tell you about the challenge of climate change and how I feel the international community could address it. It's definitely one of the greatest challenges ever, but it is often misread and poorly understood, I'm afraid. So I'm first going to elaborate on how serious it is, not only for us, but for the whole planet and all inhabitants of this planet. Then I will next tell you what I think can be achieved between now and 2050. And finally, I will tell you what the US could do to help. So first, let's get back to basics. Many of you know how serious the challenge of climate change is, but some others may think, well, I have heard that experts still disagree about the real causes of global warming. Some even disagree about the fact of global warming. So is this really an issue we should pay attention to? Actually, the popular media may give you this impression, but this is wrong. Let me tell you this. 99% of scientists around the globe agree on the reality and root causes of global warming. The greenhouse gas effect is just basic physics, not a far-fetched theory. The speeding up of global warming since the last 19th century is well documented, and the science of global warming is perfectly clear, and the role of carbon emissions is widely agreed. And as President Obama said yesterday, climate change is a fact. The only thing that is still not clear is the exact magnitude of global warming. The IPCC baseline scenario puts the likely increase from 1.8 degrees Celsius to more than 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. And nasty surprises are possible if, for example, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet in turn causes more melting. But the big picture is clear and it's quite frightening. There are several reasons why we cannot afford to delay action on global warming. For some countries, global warming is not a distant threat. It already hurts them. Extreme events, hurricanes, storms, desertification already kill people and devastate regions. The future of some of the countries is doomed if no action is taken. If global warming goes on, sea levels will continue to rise and many island states will simply disappear. As James Hansen, the leading US climate change expert, once pointed out, we cannot afford to gamble with our future. That is the future of our children and grandchildren. Life, as we know it, evolved to fit the historically normal range of temperatures. It may be able to adapt, but it will take millions of years, and in the long term, we are all extinct. So let's be clear, We have to get rid of fossil fuels, but as you know, it's not so easy. Technology is only part of the answer, not the only one. First, companies will not invest in cleaner technologies if the incentives are not there. And to get the incentives right, companies and people should pay for the environmental damage they do. So we need to put a price on carbon. We also need to better assess economic performance. GDP, for example, is a crude and in many ways misleading indicator of social and environmental progress. Unless we get broader and more relevant indicators, we cannot expect investors to go in the right direction. Secondly, even cleaner technologies will not do the trick. For example, assume your economy gets 20% more energy efficient. Is it safe to predict that emissions will be down by 20%? Not so. You will get more profitable. But if you invest all the additional cash on just consuming more, the greenhouse gas emissions cut will be tiny, in fact. So we need a sort of paradigm shift. We need to change the way we work and maybe even the way we live. I would like to add a personal comment here. Soaring carbon emissions are not only an environmental problem. The problem runs, to my view, deeper than that. It has to do with the way we interact with others and other societies, other economies, where consumption has little to do with the pursuit of happiness. There is little point in consulting mainstream economics. Instead of looking at what you really need, you look at what others have and try to challenge them. What is the best way to well-being? That's the question to all of us. Anyway, the earlier we take action, the better. This is because carbon emissions stay in the atmosphere for a very long time. So you cannot simply wait until you have more cash or better technologies. Inaction is very costly and risky. And if you act too late, it may even prove impossible to stop global warming. Indeed, global warming is not like other more conventional forms of pollution. It is often hidden, insidious, and perverse, invisible for most people. It is quite tempting to overlook it in the first place. But then things get out of control. You can clean an oil spill. You can try and maybe you can have success, however large and damaging it may be. But global warming will take very long to reverse. Many experts even think it will soon get unstoppable. Some rely on what we call geoengineering. But geoengineering cannot work wonders. It won't reverse climate change, and we have no idea whether these technologies can work and how harmful they may be. Instead of lessening the harmful consequences of climate change, we may worsen them. Now you may think, okay, the challenge is serious, but the international community is not ready to do anything about it, obviously. It will take huge investment in clean technologies to replace carbon-intensive industries, and Western taxpayers are not willing to pay for them. They are chiefly concerned with their standards of living. Developing countries want to get rich and catch up with Western countries. They are not ready to slow down their economic growth to curb global warming. Fortunately, that is not completely true. The challenges are indeed huge, but our experience is that if you get the politics and the economics right, you can move forward very fast at a relatively low cost. And indeed, we already have a wealth of very good stories to tell. Unfortunately, these stories are underreported. Let me take a few examples challenging conservative wisdom. Just a water pause. So, number one, you cannot uncouple economic growth from rising greenhouse gas emissions. Well, the EU was overachieved its Kyoto target by a wide margin while expanding its economy. Its total 2012 greenhouse gas emissions are 80% below its 1990 level. And in the same time, its economy grew with 45%. Myth number 2. Putting a price on carbon kills jobs and hampers economic growth. Well, in the USA, the SO2 emission market has been a big unexpected success. It has addressed the problem of acid rains. Back in 1990, many conservative experts warned capping emissions would harm US competitiveness, kill jobs, and cost a lot of money. Not so, just the reverse happened. Eradicating SO2 emissions was really cheap and took only a couple of years. Far from losing out, US companies ended up cleaner and more profitable. Similarly, in Europe, in the early 90s, many experts thought our companies would struggle to cut carbon emissions. The EU carbon market was under fire. Carbon prices, they predicted, were likely to soar. Instead, EU companies managed to switch to low-carbon, cost-effective technologies. The demand for emission allowances went down, and carbon price dived. And this is a problem now, because we have to increase now the carbon price. Myth number 3, renewables and energy-efficient technologies are very costly and show no sign of getting more competitive. True, clean technologies are still costly, but increasingly they are getting competitive. For example, the cost of solar power has dropped exponentially since 1980, and ironically, this is part of the reason why some EU and American companies were in big trouble during the last slump. Myth number 4, apart from the EU and the US, the energy and climate transition is, at best, a remote prospect. Well, not so. All over the world, things are changing rapidly. The whole North-South divide is narrowing. Emerging countries invest a lot in clean technologies. China is leading the way, together with India and Brazil, and there are new players. For example, in Latin America, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay are slowly catching up. So the good news is that we are gaining momentum and that there are great opportunities ahead. And indeed, President Hollande and his government believe that a global deal is possible. And I can assure you, we will do everything we can to facilitate a global forward-looking deal in Paris in 2015. We have already made good progress since Copenhagen. In Warsaw, last December, we agreed on new rules to protect tropical forests, for example. We set up a new mechanism to help the poor cope with loss and damage from heat waves, droughts, floods, desertification, and rising sea levels. Most importantly, we clarified the timeline and the pathway from Warsaw to Paris via Lima in Peru, where the next COP20 will take place. We are also encouraging nations to get ready and put forward their plans to cut emissions by the first quarter of 2015. At the French and EU level, we are doing our homework. We already have a unilateral target of cutting emissions by 20% by 2020. And we are going to debate the EU Commission's proposal to cut emissions by 40% by 2030, below the 1990 level. The EU Commission also recommends raising the share of renewable energies to 27% of the energy consumption. We have been working closely with the Secretary General of United Nations to help him prepare the September 2014 Climate Change Summit. This is a most welcome and most timely event. Hopefully, political leaders will commit there to strike a global deal in Paris in 2015. And early contributions may help raise the level of ambition of the international community. And we have been working closely with Peru to ensure that the framework agreement is already in place in Lima in late 2014. So now, what will the Paris deal will look like? First, different countries have different needs. different concerns, and different levels of development. The Paris Agreement cannot be a one-size-fits-all deal. The contributions we are looking forward to may vary across country. Their schedule and substance cannot be the same. So, sure, some flexibility is needed. Secondly, adequate climate change financing is vital. We must live up to our Copenhagen commitments to raise $100 billion a year after 2020. Finally, the level of ambitions and the level of transparency should be adequate. Carbon reduction plans should be sufficient to keep global warming under the 2 degrees Celsius limit. All countries should contribute one way or another, and the contributions should be transparent enough to build trust. Surely the civil society, that means not only NGOs, but also companies, local governments, academics, women, farmers, etc., has a big role to play. We expect them to take bold initiatives and showcase innovative practices. Most importantly, we feel that their commitments will make policymakers feel more comfortable and encourage them to move forward. But in the end of the day, the bottom-up and the top-down approaches, as we call them, should converge. Without a binding agreement between governments, no global deal will be strong enough to persuade national and local players to stick to their commitments. Now, I would like to stress that the USA, among other developed countries, will have a special role to play. What President Obama will do in Paris in 2015 will not only drive the world's largest economy, it will also set an example for the rest of the world. Of course, I am aware of the widespread American reluctance to embrace a fully fledged UN treaty, a binding treaty. Yet, a strong US commitment to a carbon-free growth pathway would be extremely helpful. And announcements that President Obama made yesterday in his speech are quite positive, I think. World leaders and global markets would listen and would be encouraged to follow suit. You may think, and rightly so, that global warming will mainly be about curbing emissions in big emerging countries in the coming decades. True, but China has already overtaken the US as world's biggest emitter. India is likely to catch up. These new economic powerhouses are changing the global balance of power, and maybe the new words are here at the East. But even big players like China or India will be quick to respond if they feel the US and Europe are serious about climate change action. They will feel it's time for them to move forward, and they may fear that if they don't go along, their economies will fall behind. So my message is this. More than ever, we need United States of America together with Europe to be ambitious and forward-looking. The challenge of global warming is daunting and unprecedented. So we need to take action now. We need to learn to better cooperate. We need to rethink the way we work and live together on this planet. I trust that the US will help us meet this new challenge. I trust that we will be working together to make sure that the planet we are leaving behind is worthy of the generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I'm available to all exchanges and to listen to all your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène, for a very good speech, both very clear and in the meantime very visionary. So I'm sure it's going to raise lots of questions and comments. But before I turn to the audience, let me maybe ask you myself a few questions. The first is on Europe. Because, of course, if we want to have a chance of success in Paris in 2015, it's important that Europe maintains its role as a leader of these climate negotiations together with others, and I think it's a positive sign that we see others starting to take bigger responsibilities and a bigger role in these international negotiations. But of course, Europe will have a particular role to play, and I'd like you to comment a little bit on the proposal that was made by the European Commission just a few days ago. That's going to be considered in the coming weeks, as I said, by the heads of states. So, proposal that includes in particular an objective to reduce emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. We've heard pretty negative comments in the press, in particular from some European NGOs, most of them related to the absence of a binding goal on renewable energy, but others have also argued, and I certainly count myself among them, that given the context, it's a pretty good deal that's going to achieve a lot. So I was curious to get your personal view on that, and there are maybe two parts to that question. I mean, the first is, is it a good deal for Europe? I mean, is it going to put Europe on the right track? And is it a good deal to prepare for the international negotiations in Paris in 2015? Is it sending the right signal to the other partners that Europe is moving forward and that others should do the same?
Okay. So about this European package, for the moment it's just a proposal from the European Commission. So it's not still decided, and so it's submitted to discussion to ministers of the 28 member states. We will discuss about it just on the next weeks. And at the end of March, on the 20th and 21st of March, there will be a European summit gathering chiefs of states and government to discuss and decide about this proposal. So we have 2 months and more, because the discussion will go on in the European Parliament too. And so it's not the end of the story. So the European Commission made a proposal. The question is this proposal is sufficient or not? But the discussion starts now. It's not finished. If we consider the facts described by the scientists, we may say it's not enough. Scientists said that we should cut by 55%, maybe more, to stay in the limit of 2 degrees Celsius before the end of the century. But in the situation we face in Europe, with a big economic financial crisis since 2008, and after the package for 2020, I think it's a very good signal that the European Commission is able today to make such a proposal, while the European Commission knows that there is a tough debate within the European Union between countries, all countries, that want to keep their national sovereignty on their energy choices. So in the United States we have 50 states plus 1, and in European Union we have, it's not a federal state. We would like to personally, but it's not. So we have to find a compromise between 28 member states. So I think in the context, in the difficult context, the proposal made by the European Commission, after a very intense lobbying from industries aiming to reduce this proposal to maybe 30%, and that's all, I think it's a good news, and now we have to support, we have to discuss, we have to convince all member states and beyond governments, public opinions, economics, that we need such a package, not only for European Union, but to reach a global deal in 2015 too. So there is a fight between short-term interest coming from economy and industry, and I don't say it's not legitimate to defend its own interest, but we must find a way to integrate long-term interests common to everybody. So it's difficult also for politicians who run elections to take into account long-term interest and to explain to public opinion and voters that we will have maybe some difficult choice to do. I heard that President Obama announced those difficulties, but we have no choice. If we want to keep living on this planet in acceptable standards and for everybody, we have to change our ways of production and consumption, and we have to get rid of fossil fuels, even if still now we can have access to new gas, oil, and coal energies. And for the moment, those are, coal is the cheapest energy you can have in many countries. So somehow it's not normal. So we should give a price to carbon. That's the other side of the European proposal, is to give a price to carbon and to reform the ETS emission trade system to increase the price of carbon that has come very low now. So if we don't give a price to carbon, of course there are no incentives for industry and new technologies to invest. So innovators, clean technologies need a stable and clear framework to invest, because when you invest in energy, you need at least 15 or 20 years of visibility. So we have to put a clear financial and economic framework to incentives to new investment in clean technologies, renewables, and so on.
Thanks. My second question is about what the French presidency called the positive agenda. So, as I understand the concept, it's based on the idea that if you want to prepare for a true success in Paris in December 2015, you should make sure that a positive message is heard, and that this is not only a negotiation about how to share the burden of reducing greenhouse gases emissions and how to pay for these emission reductions, which I think is a very good idea to change the mood around the global discussion on climate change. So I think you're working together with other countries and other stakeholders in having a number of initiatives, a number of concrete projects showing on the run-up to Paris that, well, one, it is feasible to reduce greenhouse gases emissions or to adapt to climate change, but also that it comes with co-benefits, and that this is not only a climate agenda, but that this is more broadly an environment, social, and development agenda. I was just curious to hear from you both about the concept in general and maybe have some ideas about what some of these initiatives might be, in different sectors or countries, and how they could contribute to a success of Paris in 2015, to make sure that it's not only, one more time, just an intergovernmental negotiation.
Yes, you're right. I must say that until now, climate negotiations are perceived like very abstract texts and negotiations for ordinary people. When we talk about 40% of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, or 35 or 45, what can they understand to this in their daily life? It's quite complicated. So we are not only negotiating a text with comma, different words, wording, with very complicated parts of the text, but we need absolutely to show to everybody, to all countries and people, that getting to a global agreement on climate and to adopt ambitious climate policies give also many opportunities to growth and development, but green growth and development, not the development as we know during the last century and what we call in French the Trente Glorieuses between 1960 and 1990. But a new type of development taking into account the negative impacts of our productions and consumptions on natural resources, environment, and for our health too. There are some health issues in this. So for the moment, the negotiations go very slow because many countries, emerging countries especially, are convinced that it's a way to prevent them to growth and development. And of course it's not the case. And many of those countries think that the Western and developed world find a new way to impose new constraints and new laws to free trade and free development. So we have to convince and demonstrate that there are many positive perspectives, very concrete things that we can do with a new orientation given to what we call development. And you mentioned the post-2015 agenda on sustainable development goals and Millennium Development Goals, and those discussions are linked. It's our opinion for France. I think it is shared. It's not shared by everybody, but we think we have to link positive and sustainable development and climate discussions. I don't say we must link negotiations, but we must link the issues and the impacts of all these discussions. We need a global governance on those issues. It's not easy, because within United Nations you have 192 or 3 states. Each one wants to keep his sovereignty, national choice, and have different context situations, different policies, different cultures. But it's a fantastic challenge for the 21st century, I think. So what we call positive agenda focus on different issues like smart cities, for instance. There are many initiatives between not only big cities, but also many local authorities all over the world to improve buildings, to improve transport, but also there are questions of democracy, to improve participation of citizens to new policies in the city. There are many very interesting initiatives everywhere on this. We focus also on food security and agriculture. Climate change will have a huge impact on soils because of floods and droughts. So we need to have more sustainable agricultural policies to ensure food security and quality of food. And respecting the context, geography, history, and ecologic context of each region. We focus also on the initiative supported by Ban Ki-moon on sustainable energy for all. So, as you know, many billions of people on the planet have no access to energy. So we have to develop initiatives to give access to energy, especially in rural areas. And in that field, too, there are many very interesting and positive initiatives, like in India, by the Terry Institute of Pachoy, that allowed millions of people having solar energy and lights, and that changed enormously the daily life for rural communities, and especially poor people who cannot have access to energy. So there are many sectors and ideas and initiatives on which we work now with many partners. The private sectors and economy has many initiatives too, and we have to coordinate to show positive stories about all of this. That's the meaning of positive agenda, and we think that we will have, we hope we will have, and we work for a global agreement between states and governments, but we need also to integrate to this the contributions and initiatives of all non-state actors going that way. And we need to link the top and the bottom, and to give the flow to citizens, to ordinary people. We try to do so also at the very moment of COP21 in Paris, Paris-Le Bourget. You don't know the place, but Le Bourget is in suburbs of Paris, and we don't want a sort of international conference like a sort of bunker with security and spending billions of euros to receive international delegations, and that the people living there just watching that on TV and say, what are they doing here, and what will they do? So no, we just now we prepare the conference in integrate and associating people, inhabitants, local inhabitants there, especially youth, to understand what's going on, that they could do in their own areas, in their own institutions or scholarship, and maybe to find also work in those in the logistic and organization of the conference. We need to be understood and to convince on positive perspectives, and not, as you said, on a burden we have to share because we have no choice. Nobody is motivated by this. So that's the other challenge of negotiations.
Thank you very much. I do have many more questions, but I don't want to abuse too much my position as a discussant, so let me open the floor to comments and questions from the audience. I'll come back if needed. But I do think, it's a small room, but I do think you've got microphones on both sides of the room if you want to use them. If you think you've got a loudly voice and you can get heard, that's okay. But please introduce yourself before you ask a question to Marie-Hélène.
You were trying to add the local aspect of this conference in Paris, so you said you wanted to integrate the civil society, and I was wondering concretely if you could go more into details about those ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. Let me group the questions 3 by 3 and then give you a chance to respond. Yes, please.
My name is John.
I think you need to do the same with the button on the top of the microphone. There is a button at the top, I think.
My name is John Otto Manelli. I am a PhD candidate at Rutgers University. And one of the points that you'd made is the significance of political will to support activities to promote these kinds of policies, and the concern for some states that these approaches are going to hinder growth. And I don't know if this is unique to the United States. And while President Obama last night made quite clear that climate change is a reality, we still have some political will concerns in the United States. For example, as recently as this week, national legislators are trying to pass legislation to present an argument that the science of climate change is false. Is this unique to the United States? Is this a problem that we only see in the United States, or is this a problem that other states around the world have addressed or have demonstrated concern for? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Good morning, madam, and thank you for being with us this morning. My name is David Grineval. I'm a dual degree student between Sciences Po and Columbia University. And my question sort of overlaps the last question that was asked. It's also on political will. The recent episode that we've had in France with the eco-tax and previous episodes have shown that there is a strong resistance of population when they are faced with environmental measures that actually hurt their purchasing power, like you reminded us. And so my question would be, what do you think we need in terms of political leadership in order to carry these reforms forward?
Thank you very much. Let me ask the others to stand up for a while, because I'd like to give the floor to Marie-Hélène to respond to these three first questions.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief to all the many questions. So, how to integrate local people? I give you some details. Just last year, we nominated General Secretary for COP21, Mr. Guerin, who is in charge of organizing concretely the conference on the space, or called Le Bourget, which is a place on the north of Paris, not far from the airport, maybe one of the biggest greenhouse gas emissions in the sector. That's a joke. For instance, Mr. Guerin receives many delegations from local authorities, and I met with him also the persons who are in charge of all problem of transports and hosting delegations, and also the mayor of Le Bourget, the president of the region called Île-de-France, where is Paris and is region. And the fact is that the president of the French National Assembly, Claude Bartolone, is also very well known and was a president of the department where there is the conference. And it's I wouldn't say poor, that's not the case, but it's not a rich region. And for all those people living in suburbs from Paris, I'm sure they don't know so much about climate change and climate policies. And right now there are some initiatives in schools, in different areas, to explain what's going on, and what the mayors and local authorities with all stakeholders could do to improve, for instance, the carbon emissions and public transports and building and rural heat and energy. There are many local initiatives. So we have also to have education and sensibilization campaigns on large medias and also at local and regional levels. And not only in Paris and Île-de-France, you have also many initiatives in other regions in France. And many of them want to host events, not only during the conference, but before. So we try to build an agenda from now to December 2015, where each region, each big cities or rural areas could host some discussions, dialogues with local citizens, and when it's possible at a European or international level, inviting people, or French citizens or youth could go also to events, because there are some initiatives all over the world to participate to dialogues with all people. So we try to be on earth and linked to daily life and ordinary people. And so it's not only a question, of course, of chiefs of state or negotiators closed in a room with their texts to which nobody understands anything, but to enlarge the debate and the issue to really how we want to live tomorrow, in which cities, in which way, in which car, how we want to live and consume. So I think those issues concern, interest all citizens, all inhabitants, wherever they live. So it's what we try to do. Second question about climato-skepticism. I'm afraid it's a US specialty, but but not only. We have also in France 2 or 3 scientists. I would not say they contest the climate change, but they say that there are uncertainties, that we must complete analysis, that there are doubts, maybe, that it's not so sure that it's coming from human activities, and that there have been change since centuries in the climate, and that it's not so sure that this climate change is linked to human activities. But there are very few, really. And I think with the new report, the 5th report of IPCC, now things are clear. IPCC made a great job, and now we have clear facts approved by the whole academic community all over the world about this. So, as I said in my speech, we have some doubts and uncertainties about the speed of the global warming and its impacts in region. And IPCC scientists now focus also, that they did not that before, but now they focus also on impacts, regional impacts, economic and social impacts. So there will be 2 new reports from IPCC coming in March and April, describing those impacts and elaborating scenarios that could help societies and politicians to get the right policies to achieve the goals that they recommend. So we know that there are some very strong lobbyists, especially in the fossil fuels sectors, with some scientists. We try still now to demonstrate that all this affair is a sort of big hoax, and obviously it's not. And I think now, most people all around the planet is aware that we have a big problem with climate change, even if it's not clear for everybody what is causing this climate change. But we need education, we need information everywhere in all schools and medias. And of course, as you know, with the functioning of medias today. When you are a polemist, when you are against the mainstream, you are sure to have a microphone. So, unfortunately, medias give very, very much importance to very margin people who don't represent, in fact, the realities and the majority of the scientists. On the question from David and the strong resistance from population, for instance, with ecotax, it's not so clear and so simple, because one French region protests against ecotax. But just yesterday, I read that rail sector, maritime transport, were protesting against a renouncement on ecotax, because the revenues coming from this tax were supposed to finance new infrastructures for maritime clean transport. So public transport, trains, tramways, boats, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions coming from transport. So there is a debate and there is a fight, and it's not so clear. And I would not say it's the population who is against ecotax. Of course, if you say to citizens that the price of gasoline will increase of 10%, they won't be happy. But I think we need also a clear orientation and choice from politicians, and they have to endorse their choice and their responsibilities to explain what we are doing, that we have to shift from a financial and economic system to another, because we have to integrate in the economic evaluation the negative impacts we have, not only on climate, but globally and environments. So it's a new new way. We need new indicators, new analysis, and we need politicians to be clear about this and to be stable and not go back each time there is a protest somewhere. So, of course, it's not so easy, and in France we have this problem too. But step by step, if there is a clear orientation supported by a majority, I think we can manage this and fight against resistance, misunderstandings, and fears, because, of course, many people fear for their job, and they think they will be sacrificed for the benefit of the environment, and we must explain all of this.
Yeah, I agree very much with that. Let me add very quickly a couple of points on the two last questions. I mean, first, I certainly agree with Marie-Hélène. The US is kind of special, but it is certainly not alone in climate skepticism. What I find very interesting is that if you look at the countries where climate skepticism is strong and not only the view of a few scientists, it is always in the fossil fuel exporting countries, and not necessarily in the big fossil fuel importing countries. So you've got the US, somehow you have Canada, you have Russia, you have Australia. All of them are fossil fuel exporters, and I think it's not randomly that this is the case. You've got very well organized private interests trying to make their view heard. Your point about emission reductions hindering growth, as Marie-Hélène said very clearly in her speech, I mean, this is an argument that doesn't hold at the global level and on average, simply because the high carbon growth path is going to kill itself. That's very important to understand. So what is often presented as the business as usual is just hypothetical. I mean, there is no choice to follow the business as usual scenario, because it would dramatically hinder growth and have social and environmental impacts also, but simply hinder growth. That being said, it's true that climate policy can have negative impacts on some sectors or some industries within these sectors, in particular if you think about coal. I think it's important to be clear that what we're talking about is a really deep transformation of our economies and our societies, and it has distributional consequences. And there are going to be, well, if we look at it from a static point of view, there might be losers and winners, but it is also precisely the role of policies of governments to compensate the losers and to find an opportunity for them. And this is also why it's not only a scientific or an economic agenda, but this is very much a political agenda, because you need to make sure that you build a package with something for every state in the US, in particular Wyoming, or every member state in the European Union, in particular Poland, etc., etc. The question on the carbon tax and political willingness, I also agree with Marie-Hélène. I mean, for me, it's not so much an issue of the lack of political willingness, because I think there is a political will to have these instruments implemented. But for me, it's a big problem of political messaging and political communication, because in most cases, the purpose of introducing these carbon pricing instruments in different forms has been badly explained by governments. I'm going to blame the previous governments here in France, but it was, and I hope the new one is going to do a better job. But it was never clear for the public what was really the purpose of having this new instrument. I mean, if it is presented just as adding to the tax burden, it's never going to fly in the political debate. If you make the argument that the revenues of this tax can be used to invest in the new economy, in the economy of the future, and therefore in the low-carbon economy, then it starts being a bit different. So I think there is a strong case to be made for the earmarking of at least part of these revenues for financing the transition to a low-carbon economy. I think there is another argument to be made for introducing a carbon tax in a tax-neutral way. So you add a tax, and in the meantime, you reduce some other taxes, in particular taxes on labor or taxes on business revenues. I think it's important to win the political argument on these issues. But I'll stop here and take other questions. And we're going to take all of them, because we need to close in about 10 to 15 minutes. So all questions in a row, please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Eugenie. I'm in the PhD in Sustainable Development here at SIPA. I'd like to come back to this positive agenda you mentioned earlier. I found it like a very interesting idea. Maybe it could be like seen as the redesigning of the context and how climate change is being negotiated. You've talked about how you're communicating about climate change, and I think it's great to hear that we should talk about it as positive changes for the world. But at the end of the day, what countries are negotiating is really reduction of emissions. So it feels like the bottom line will always keep some sort of negativity in it. So I was wondering, would there be a way to bring this positive agenda into what exactly is going to be at the stakes of the negotiation? Could we negotiate on technologies? Maybe it will seem a bit more of a command and control type of policy, and I'm sure a lot of people will be advocating against. But maybe could this be a more efficient way to actually achieve some results? So I just wanted to have your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thanks. Very good question. Please.
My name is Vincent Brancato. I'm a chair of the Environmental Stewardship Committee here at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. I have a couple of linked questions. The president yesterday addressed gas as a solution. We all know that that's from horizontal hydraulic hydrofracking. I'm curious if there's a position on that going to be brought up in Paris. This is tied to the TPP a little bit, the ability to do that nationally, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that doesn't involve France. And the last point, to be very brief, is I'm curious if the strong posture of nuclear energy in France influences at all the position of the French government. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Cassia. I'm a master's degree student here at SIPA. And I don't know, thank you very much for sharing your views with us this morning. I don't know if it's a little bit early, but I would like to know more about the implementation of the agreement, because I think was one of the major flaws of the Kyoto Protocol. So how issues as the carbon pricing or the transfer of technology and resource to developing countries are going to be addressed in this new agreement? And also if the emerging countries, if the discussions are, if they are going to be only volunteer commitments, or if the emerging countries are going to commit in a more binding goals in this agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, please.
Hello, good morning, and thank you very much for your insights. My name is Patrick Duffy. I work at the Irish Mission here to the UN. I'm just thinking 2015 is going to be a very important year. In September, hopefully we'll have agreement on the post-2015 development agenda for the next 15 years or so. In December, hopefully we'll have the climate agreement in Paris. So I know you've talked a little bit about this, but maybe if you could elaborate on how you see climate change being reflected in the post-2015 development agenda, and how we can avoid missing out anything important in the September agreement that might only be decided in December. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation this morning. My name is Robert Fishman, and I've just completed my master's degree requirements here in sustainability management. And I'm also working as the director of commercial programs for a group called Energize New York. My question is about political economy. We are talking about governments making agreements and talking about carbon taxes. I'm somewhat interested also to hear your thoughts on the financial markets, and how finance can be brought to bear to open up credit markets. What policies can be brought to bear to open up credit markets to address issues such as available credit to organizations and groups that are interested in improving energy efficiency or transportation projects, things like that. The credit markets, of course, bridge national boundaries, and so I wonder how those groups will be brought into the discussions in Paris. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And final question.
Hi, my name is Michael Good. I'm a Master's of Development Practice here at Columbia. And my question is, how can international negotiations reconcile patterns of consumption and manufacturing? For instance, the President said last night the United States has reduced its emissions, but if these emissions are just displaced to China for manufactured goods that are primarily consumed in the United States, how can responsibility be attributed or shared between nations?
Thank you very much. Marie-Hélène, I think you have a number of pretty interesting questions to respond.
I think 10 minutes won't be enough to answer to all of this. Maybe we could share Emmanuel on some aspect. I would like to answer to the question about shale gas and nuclear power. The position of the French government for the moment, and the President is quite clear. We are against fracking, the method of fracking, because we think that the impact on the environment and water resources is too high. So there's no exploration or exploitation of shale gas in France for the moment. But it's a national choice. As I said, each member state of the European Union is free to choose its energy mix. And for instance, Poland, Great Britain decided to encourage shale gas. So they are allowed to within the European Union. And there was a debate recently whether the European Union or not should have legislation on a framework for exploitation of shale gas. And finally, the European Commission didn't. They decided to leave each member state doing what he wants about his own energy choices. So the French position today is quite clear about shale gas, but to be honest, there is a debate within the government about shale gas. And as you can imagine, the Minister of Industry would be in favor of at least explore the resources of shale gas we have in France, because we are supposed to have some, and to lead research on clean technology to exploit shale gas. And of course, the green part of the majority and the Minister of Environment is very against this. And so there is debate. It's not so simple. But the position of the French government and French president now is clear. There won't be any exploitation of shale gas during this mandate. For nuclear power, the president made some commitments that we would reduce the part of nuclear energy in our electricity from 75%, that's the rate today, to 50% in 2025. So that means that we want to diversify our energy mix and to have a development of renewables, for instance, to produce electricity and not only nuclear power. There are also some other reasons, because our nuclear plants were built now 40 years ago, and they were built for 35 years. So now the question is what we will do with this. Do we have new nuclear plants? But which ones? And it will cost a lot. Or do we stop some of them? So this debate is still going on. But the decisions to reduce the part of nuclear power within our energy mix is taken. But the debate goes on about the future of nuclear energy during this century, not only in France, but also all around the world. Because there's also a question of safety, there are a question of waste, a question of costs. And if we we have 58 reactors for the moment. If you want to replace them whole, I think it's impossible for the national budget. So we have to. That's the debate. We had a large debate in France called Debate on Energy Transition, integrating all stakeholders, all opinions, all views coming from industry, civil society, local authorities, everybody contributed to this debate. And now there is a law in preparation that should be published next spring or summer, and then will be debated within the parliament to decide what will be our energy policy in the future now in France. There are many questions on climate in post 2015 agenda. Yes, I said that France is in favor of integrating those issues on sustainable development goals and climate issues, but it's not shared by everybody. It's not supported by everybody. But France is convinced that we must make progress on the two tracks and link the discussions and reflections about climate issues and sustainable development issues. Because we can't be in a permanent contradiction between the mainstream of economy and what we are supposed to do about global environmental issues. So we have, at one moment, we have to fit and be coherent between energy and industry policies and global environmental issues. That's not the case for the moment. And the international discussion about sustainable development goals, I think it's a huge opportunity to do this. And the year is 2015. So 2015, I think, will be a crucial year for all these discussions on climate and sustainable development. It won't be the end of the history, of course. There will be negotiations and discussions further on. But I think it will be a very crucial step to go further on those discussions. Maybe Emmanuel, on credit markets, I'm not a super specialist of this, so maybe Emmanuel could answer.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. Let me try very shortly to address some of the other issues that were raised, but also rapid because this is about time to do so. On shale gas, I think it's important to look at it as potentially a good thing in the short term in some national contexts, not everywhere, depending on the energy mix, and provided you can address the local environmental aspects, and that's a big if, because it's not been demonstrated anywhere. But if it is the major and the only driver of the energy policy, it is a bad thing in the long term, because it might reduce the greenhouse gases emissions of the US in the short term by shifting from coal to shale gas. But in the long term, it is still way too many emissions to be within the global carbon budget. So provided you can address the local environmental issues, it is only a bridging option towards a different energy system in the longer term. So my main worry, in addition to the environmental aspects, is that I do have the impression that in the US, the shale gas boom has stopped the investment in installation, but also in innovation of renewable energies, which will be a very important part of the mix in the longer term if we're serious about climate change. On finance, I can't be long on that, but I'll be happy to discuss after the conference with you more specifically. But there are ongoing, very interesting initiatives to find new ways to finance the transition to a low-carbon economy. And in particular, what's new is, lots of initiatives with institutional investors, and in particular pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, and trying to align their incentives and to build financial products that meet their requirement, but can also finance renewable energy or energy efficiency projects. There are such initiatives going on in preparation for the September 2014 World Leaders Climate Summit. So I see that as a very positive sign. Then let me group questions 1 and 3 on basically the link in between the positive agenda and the actual negotiations and the implementation of the agreement to give my very final word. I think it's a very good point. There is today a flurry of initiatives going on, but we need to have the right intellectual framework to see if the different initiatives add up to what is needed in the long term. So it's very important that we assess the contribution of these initiatives to what we know is the global carbon budget to stick to the 2-degree target. Otherwise, we run a big risk of having initiatives that feel good, but which are not necessarily enough to meet the challenge of climate change. In the meantime, and that's to respond to your question, I see their role not only to build the political momentum before the COP21 in December 2015, but also as having a very important role in the implementation of the agreement, because it's making the proof in specific cases, specific countries, specific sectors, that it can be done through different types of instruments. So, and I think the world has made great progress from the time of Kyoto or Copenhagen. So it's no longer an international negotiation where you just discuss about the target and you have no idea how to reach the target, but it's very much a discussion about the different policies that are being implemented or planned, and what is the target to further incentivize these changes. And again, I see that as a very positive change from the past. So we're going to stop here. Please join me in thanking one more time very much Marie-Hélène Aubert for being with us today. We were very happy to have you with us. It's only, as Alessia said, the first in a series of conferences, so we really look forward to have you with us in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you.